Siang Pa.
And welcome back, episode 2 of Papa's Corner Really Dope. Thank you for joining us once again. And thank you for those of you that watched episode 1. Didn't watch episode 1 yet, make sure to run that back real quick. But today, our focus is on co-parenting. Before we start that, there's a few shout outs I want to do. So when I think about co-parenting, I want to give a quick shout out to single parents, adoptive parents, step parents, and anybody else who might fall in that bucket, right? Because you're taking on a role that not many people would do in general, right? But you're stepping up in ways that is truly admirable. So, shout out to you. And for those of you who just voluntarily decide to not be your child's life, I have some choice words for you. All right.
Getting hot in here. Let everyone know my slogan.
So now that I got that off my chest, I want to talk about the realities of co-parenting, right? So co-parenting is one of those things where the language could get murky for everybody because everybody sees co-parenting as a variety of things. Some people might view it as a separate household thing where you're separated from your partner, you're divorced from your partner. Some people might view co-parenting as same household, right? Whatever floats your boat. Co-parenting is co-parenting at the end of the day, right? It's all about bridging the relationship between you and the other parent in order to make sure the child is well. That actually brings me to the first point, right? So when we think about co-parenting, it can be something that's very fruitful, but in order for it to work, there's a lot of ways in which you have to open yourself up to then allow for the situation to enhance or to be better. Not only for the moment, right? Because parenting is a journey. So think about long term, and I'll get to that later. So the first thing I want to say about co-parenting is look at yourself in the mirror, right? You and your partner, you and your ex-partner, look at yourself in the mirror. This is not about you. I'm sorry. Your ego might hurt a little bit. This is not about you. It's not. It's about one person or a couple of folks, depending on your situation. It's about the child, right? You put the child first because at the end of the day, that is the only person that is truly going to have that long term, is going to be impacted long term based on your actions, right? When we think about co-parenting, we think about the way in which conflicts or situations or attitudes or communication styles or parenting styles then impact the child's emotional well-being, physical well-being, or psychological well-being, right? And sometimes there are things that are out of our power. But what I want us to be mindful of is the fact that there are many things that are in the locus of our control. And sometimes we let our egos get in the way of that, right? And there's a saying the ego is more of the facade of who you really are, more like a mask. Sometimes we have to take the mask off and just say, okay, let me put a pause on this because it's bigger than me. It's bigger than us. Because in reality, once you made the decision to bring a child into this world, it truly does become bigger than you because now there's an extension of you that you have to now think of because now your actions have consequences because they don't only trickle down to your life, they trickle down to your little ones, right? And you say, well, Carlos, how can I only think about the child? How does that work? Well, in reality, there's no one secret formula, right? This is not SpongeBob, right? There's no secret Krabby Patty formula. It's just components, right? In this case, if you want to think about bringing it back to SpongeBob condoms, right? Or like ingredients. The first one that I could think of is communication. Communication is crucial, y'all. If you can't literally spend 5 minutes talking to someone without animosity, without understanding, things are going to be tough. And trust me, co-parenting, no matter if you're married, divorced, separated, like in the fairy tale, things get real difficult as a parent. I could tell you myself from my own experience. My wife and I, we've been together 4 years now, right? But it didn't start as like when people see our relationship, people think, oh, like you guys are so happy, things are going so well for you. Yeah, we worked hard for that, right? My wife and I were on a high and by basis. One day I picked her up from brunch. Shout out to brunch, you know. Um, and one thing led to another. And as she's driving me to drop me off at the airport, because I'm going to my fraternity's Noche Dorada in Miami. She's like, I don't want to ruin your trip, but something I have to tell you. And she says, you're going to be a father. And I'm like, okay, cool. My mindset is the way I was raised. I hit her with the listen. At the end of the day, it's your body. At, you know what's best for you. So this weekend, while I'm away, take the time to truly like think about the situation that we are in. And if you want to continue with this, let's do it. I'll be there to support you. I'll come back. She decided to continue, and it ended up being one of the most beautiful yet difficult situations because we still had to learn and grow, right? And within that, we had to learn a lot about each other because we were never in a relationship, right? It wasn't until 4 or 5 months in where we literally, I think, just booked a flight to Toronto and said, like, that could be a great bonding experience. And that's when we knew. We looked at each other in the airport and said, hey, this is actually going to work, right? But with that came a lot of ups and downs because there were a lot of like styles of communication that like we had to dissect, right? We both had our own trauma that we actually hadn't unpacked yet, and we had to do it together, right? So there was a lot of moments where it was like a roller coaster, and there were like a lot of ups, a few downs, and that's part of the process, right? And it's just not gonna come, as I love saying this, overnight. And even though you might not be with that person, there's a certain communication medium that you need to have because it could be where you went from not speaking at all to saying, you know what, like let's hop on the call and have like a parent meeting real quick, right? Because there's a point where you just have to grow up and do it for for the sake of the child. Because there's a lot of things that need to happen for the child to be their happiest, right? To be productive, to be the best child that they can be. And I'm gonna get to some points that might impact that later, right? Um, and you see how I say like at least sacrifice that little bit of time. That's one of the biggest things that you have to do. We hear that often. Like in order if we want something to go well, we have to we have to make certain sacrifices, and that also goes with parenting. Um, and now with that sacrifice comes consistency and routine. There's going to be moments where you feel like you have to give a part of yourself. And that's exactly what you're doing, right? Because now that's where you're putting the child first and you're saying, okay, I might not have as much free time to do X thing, right? Like I love the gym. I went from 300 pounds to 175 pounds. The gym was my life, literally. But once I had kids, I knew it became a bit more difficult because I had to prioritize, especially my son having his developmental challenges that had to take a back burner, right? What that also meant was I lost like my place to escape mentally, right? So what I had to do was I had to communicate and create routines with my wife where we just made it work. And why was it hard? My wife is a night nurse, right? She works 7 to 7. I sometimes have to end up with taking care of Landon and now Asiel together. And I have to put them down. I have to shower them, prepare Landon by the morning. And then when she comes in, I have to make sure that I can still take care of Asiel. So she can at least get a couple hours in before I go to work. Right. In that moment, I can be selfish to say, wow, I wish I could work out. Right. But I also have to be mindful that now that allows me to create a routine where my son knows exactly at what time he has to brush his teeth. He knows when his bus is coming, right? He sometimes even rushes me. But that also allows my wife to create the routine that, listen, I need to get a couple hours rest and I shouldn't be playing with my rest because at the end of the day, Carlos might be working from 12 to 8 today. And if I don't rest, I'm going to have a tough day and that's going to impact our relationship, right? Let's say you're in a separated household and it might be a thing as simple as, hey, in house A, bedtime is at 11 p.m. That might be a little late. But bedtime might be 11 p.m. So in house B, it better be 11 p.m. because what's going to happen is the baby's going to say, hey, but over here, I sleep at midnight, or over here, I don't have a bedtime. Now you're creating friction, right? Because the baby's going to start having like favoritism, right? The baby's going to start being mindful of where they want to be long term, right? Because perfect example, my children like to be in their grandparents' house because in their grandparents' house, they get away with everything, right? Whereas in our home, we kind of take that back, right? The reason why you want to have that consistency is because you don't want the child to start lashing out because they're confused. In reality, you'll think they're like, oh, but you're used to this. Yes, but once you break that, right, the child now starts thinking that they can do all the above, and you no longer have like that structure that made your life a little bit easier, right? Now, if the child is going to sleep at midnight, you just lost the hour where you're probably prepping their lunch for the next day, where you're putting your other child to sleep. Wait, that's probably your mental hour, right? We have to start thinking about how everything that we do impacts the whole unit because you are a unit, even if you are not together every single day. But this gets to that next part about it. That means flexibility is required, right? Because no matter how much you try and make a routine, things come up, right? So what you need to do is find a way for that to be kept. Okay. There might be moments where the person might have a doctor's appointment and you might have to call out, but you might have to call out more because of the fact that the child is used to you or just parents in general taking them on the bus rather than a grandparent, right? You don't want to change that because then that creates expectations. And that's the last thing you need because then that means your routine is broken and that creates different habits that now you have to answer for the next day or the next week or the next month, right? So you have to be mindful of the fact that if you're rigid and not flexible and you become that parent that says, oh, I can't right now, right? One, the person that you're communicating with becomes resentful. Two, that can turn into one of those moments, well, oh, your parent was not able, parent A or parent B was not able to pick you up because they didn't want to, right? And then we start getting into that battle of language where like poisonous thoughts might be going into the child's mind unintentionally because the parent is just naming their frustration. Um, but it ends up being a lose-lose, I promise, right? Uh, so when being flexible, you have to be mindful that things come up because life is life. And you have to understand that although you might be pissed off in the moment for the other person's situation, you have to be mindful of the fact that it might happen to you, that you might need something, right? And when you need something, they'll be able to be there for you because you've opened that door to say, you know what, listen, I held you down. It's my turn, right? There's moments where my wife gets to, like, let's say we're home on a weekend and I'm working on a project and my wife slept with the kids. She'll see that there's a little window where the kids are calm, say watching Sesame Street or something. And she'll say, yo, babe, go take a nap real quick. And I'll nap an hour, maybe two. That makes me feel rejuvenated. Then I could be the best version of myself for them. Right. So be mindful that there are certain sacrifices within that flexibility, but it is okay because it's going to help you long term. Within that flexibility though, right? And like those conversations, one of the biggest pieces is navigating your differences. And navigating your differences is really tough because sometimes when you think about navigating your differences, the differences is the reason why some people are not together. The differences is why, even though you're in the same household, sometimes you might notice that there's a day where you're not talking to someone because you don't know how to like bridge that, right? I can think about situations where, although I'm getting ahead of myself and I think about backseat grandparenting, right? Or backseat parenting. I could give you the perfect example. My other brother, Carlos, like I said, share the same name. He has children in Dominican Republic, right? And although he and my brother are father and son, they just don't have a great form of communication. So I find myself being in the middle of things. And I often have to talk to my dad and say, Bob, like at the end of the day, You're 62. You are who you are, right? But you also have to be mindful that, like, being that you're gonna raise your children, you don't necessarily know what it is to like have that relationship. So you need to be mindful of like how you speak and the things you say, because at the end of the day, you're not really naming the fact that, hey, I know we don't have the best relationship. Hey, like, what works best for you? Right? Hey, what should I be mindful of when we have this conversation? Right? Because that then allows y'all to like build on something. But I often talk to my brother, and it's like one of those things where my dad is almost like he's co-parenting with my dad, because my dad has a lot of thoughts, being that he's been around the kids for so long, and he always wants to share his opinion rather than actually ask my brother like, hey, how can I support? It's more of like, hey, I'm taking care of your kids. Why are you not doing X, Y, and Z thing? And at the end of the day, that just built a wedge, right? The same thing could be said in the same household where you have the your partner naming essentially what they're doing compared to what you're doing, right? And that might make you feel belittled, and that might make you feel deterred from actually doing more things that you would like to do, because at the end of the day, you might be like, you know what, it's not going to make a difference, because you're no longer thinking about the child. You're thinking about more of what the other person says, right? And it sucks because with co-parenting, there's this idea that like if you live with someone and depending on your relationship, there might be moments where your ego tells you, why is this person controlling me? And the same thing happens at separate households, because in your mind you're like, oh, I have a child with this person, so why are they trying to like still take charge of who I am as a person? We don't talk anymore. We're not in a relationship anymore. So then like your brain starts talking to you and saying like, hey, no, I'm not gonna let this happen because this person is not my person anymore, or I'm my own person, and they don't get to decide that for me. When in reality, the bigger picture is making sure that everything that you're doing is for the betterment of the child. So there's sometimes like we have to pause, step back, and like, oh, okay, there might be times where I have to read in between the lines, but that's a little tough because right now I'm pissed, right? Um, and that's one of those things where when you have those conversations, you can like lay it out. I think nowadays, the hard part is we want to just name things and say, you're not doing this, you're not doing this, rather than saying, okay, I do this in my space because this works for me, right? What works for you? How can I implement that in my space? Because at the end of the day, y'all all raised different. Y'all all have different mindsets. So you're not going to do the same thing. Discipline might look different. Language might look different. Um, Even the way you have the child clean up looks different. Even the way you put the child to sleep looks different. Even the way you do the routines look different. But at the end of the day, the time could still be consistent. The idea and the name could still be consistent. So when they hear the name, they know exactly what to do. Right. So those are the things that we need to be mindful of when we like navigate those differences, and like name, you gotta name everything, because we what's that saying? Oh, I could read your mind, right? That's one of the biggest things that like leads to arguments, like, oh, I'm supposed to read your mind. When in reality is no, we actually supposed to communicate so you can know what's actually on my mind, and we can say, okay, how can we solve this? But that comes with maturity and being able to just really break down the situation to the best of your ability. Um, but that's not easy. Everything here is a challenge because you're just on high alert all the time because again, there's somebody else involved in the situation, or multiple people or persons or a little person, right? And this actually leads on to the next part, which is huge. And it kind of also reverts back to episode one, which is emotional challenge. Listen, dads, we go through a lot, but mothers have this different connection to children that like, I don't even know how to explain it. It's one of those things where we're very observant, right? And we can see things and we're mindful of things and habits of our children. You know how there's twin telepathy? I think I said that right. I probably didn't, but it's fine. Let me rock. Um, moms and like children have that. And it's one of those things where it's just natural and you have to let it be. And you just, if anything, pick up from it, right? Um, and sometimes like you have to just like better that situation because if not, it's gonna roll over to you, right? And as parents, what we need to do is be mindful how our emotional challenges impact the way we treat ourselves and how we treat the person that's within us in this situation. And if you are by yourself, find that village that's going to allow you to feel, that's going to allow you to be you, that's going to allow you to like fuck up and move forward, right? Like as a parent, you're always going to feel like a failure, but you have to be able to name that because if not, you're going to let it eat you alive and then that's not going to create a solution for anybody. And you're going to get in like a dark hole where you're going to not, where you're going to feel like you're not enough as a parent. And that's the last thing you need because at the end of the day, you might not see it in the moment. You're going to be like, I'm doing the best I can as a parent, but in reality, you're not because there's going to be certain moments where you just feel stuck and the child might not see it when they're young, but especially if they're older, they'll see it. They just might not say anything until it comes to like a breaking point. All right. So think about the fact that with these emotional challenges, right, there's going to be sadness, there's going to be frustration, there's going to be, there's going to be jealousy, right? It may not even, it might not even be between you and like your partner and or your ex or the like other families. It could legit be between you and a sibling where you see a sibling like being able to provide in different ways where you can't. It could literally be between the love that your parent is giving the child that they didn't give you because now you're overthinking like, hey, why didn't I get that? Because I'm probably not able to reciprocate that for my child, right? So you start overthinking, right? Because you keep yourself in a rut. But eventually all you're doing is not noticing how you might be emotionally mistreated your child in the sense of like being standoffish, right? Being a bit more negligent in moments where you think everything is perfectly fine and in reality your child needs you, right? And it hurts to even hear the idea, like think about like, yo, have I been negligent? And there's moments where there's just truth in that, and that's just a tough word to like digest, but it's okay to be real with yourself, right? There's moments where I've had like my anxiety's through the roof and my wife has to snap me back and she knows I'm just having a tough time and she's like, the boys want to hug right now. The boys are trying to get your attention. And I'm like, shit. I feel like an asshole, but I'm glad I have somebody there to do it for me and like remind me because now after that first time I was like, I can't fuck up like that again. And that's why I say sometimes we need those people. We need that community. And if we don't have it, listen, if you don't have that direct community, I would say it's one of those things where you might have to find it externally because we can't do this alone. We just can't. Like, we can for the moment, but how sustainable is it? Right? Unless you're in like an amazing situation. But then again, even that can be a bit more complicated because eventually you're going to be in a space where you're going to be celebrating your wins, but then you're going to be looking around saying, I wish I could share this. Right? So just be mindful of your emotional challenges. You are human and it is okay. You are seen, you are heard. It is tough, but bounce back from it, right? Because the last thing you need is to take it out on each other and on yourself and on your community. Because sometimes there's no coming back from that. Okay. And once you're able to combat all of those things, then you could build something that's really important. And these two kind of tie into the navigating differences, flexibility, consistency of routines. And that's boundaries and respect. Even if you're married, you each have sacred moments and spaces that you need, right? There's certain boundaries that you have within your mindsets, right? There's certain ways of thinking that sometimes you keep to yourself because you know it might impact someone differently. My wife, when Landa gets sick, being that been it, he's had what 3 surgeries in and out of hospitals until he was like 2. That like when he turned 2 years old, that's when his life became normal. But when that boy gets sick, like her world shuts down. but I'm very mindful of that because I understand, right? And I know I can't cross that boundary of saying like, "Hey, you're being dramatic," because at the end of the day, in reality, she knows what it's like to possibly lose a child. Who am I to say like, "Hey, babe, you're being dramatic. He's fine," when I too have seen what he has gone through and what she has gone through in the process, right? So you, as a co-parent, need to be mindful how your partner feels in certain situations, what your partner needs in certain situations. Sometimes you might feel like they're mad at you. In reality, they just need space because, especially if, let's say, a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home parent, they sometimes become overstimulated, right? Or there might be a moment where they had a tough day at work and they like, yo, they just need 5 minutes of silence, and that's okay. It's okay to like give them that little selfish moment because if not, they might not be able to be the best version of themselves. And that's going to create like conflict between the two of you. And that's the last thing you need. Right. And with that, I could also think about folks who are in separate households. The best co parenting situations I've seen are where people truly respect the other person's space and everything that they do and the way they positively talk about the other person, even though they're not together. And I think that's super important because the child sees that they can be like, wow, my parents are not together, but my mommy or daddy or daddies or mommies really do a great job at like hyping each other up. Right. Or, and it's as easy as like, I've seen a situation where my brother and his ex partner legit hold each other down to the point where she's willing to help with his kids that are not her kids and say like, hey, they could stay with me if you need, right? Or hey, by the way, if you need to drop them off with me so you can go work overtime, please do that. Like that's so hard to fathom nowadays because the way we see things in social media is like you cut the person off and it becomes the most toxic thing possible. And it doesn't have to be that way. I promise you, it doesn't have to be that way. Right. It's just sometimes how we let society influence us. Um, and one of the most beautiful things I've seen too is, and this part is hard, right? Is allowing people to be themselves and sometimes build a life after you. Some people can't understand that someone might come after you. And I understand it's tough. You're like, I don't want my child being around somebody because I can't trust them. And that's perfectly okay. And I respect that. Right. But what you can't do is stop the other person from building that trust with somebody else. And when the time comes, the least you could do is like, yo, let's at least have a conversation. Because if you become a dick about it or an asshole about it, it's going to be tough for you to even be in the same space with your child at the same time as the other person. How are birthdays going to look? Right? How are the holidays going to look? Now you're putting yourself and you're putting the child in a situation where they have to go from place to place to place to place. That's really tough. Yeah. I have a brother that has 6 children, 4 mothers in that situation. And I've seen the impact that it can have on kids where they have to pick and choose who they have to go with. And sometimes they're not happy about it because they know that there's animosity in the space where sometimes they just want to share the space with everybody that's involved. Right. It's not like they're going to call that person their parent, but they got to at least build a relationship where they at least have multiple people that love them. Because again, I'm bringing it back. It's not fucking about you. And I'm sorry, I'm cursing, but it's like, it's one of those things that it starts to become infuriating, especially when you see it. And yes, I'm not in that situation. So you could be like, Carlos, you don't know what you're talking about. But listen, I got no exaggeration over 10 nieces and nephews. And I've seen all I can see. Right. And I tell you, the best situations are the ones that make it work and that has respect and boundaries for the people involved. Right. Hey, listen, if you want to go on vacation, I respect your space. Leave me the child. I know it's not my week. I know I just worked hella OT. I know, I know you might just be having a hard time. So just go do your thing. Go do it. Right. Because I know I might have that moment myself. And then think about like how beautiful that creates for the communication you have. Right. Like hey, by the way, this is so fluid. I know we're not together, but this is also not weird, right? And like, that's so dope because now you don't have to like suck your teeth and say, damn, I really got to call this person now. And I really don't want to hear their voice. Think about the level of stress that like just decreases. Think about the the less wrinkles you'll have on your face, the less aging, the less gray hairs, the less arguments, the less trauma you create for yourself and the children, right? It's so much bigger, right? Sometimes we thinking like so we think so small in the world so big, right? And I know with like social media nowadays, it's a little tough, right? Because like it could be a situation where you might be in your head and a TikTok just miraculously pops up talking about like a 50 page or like a 50 quoted video talking about how shitty their situation is with their co-parent that makes you bring up all these emotions. What the reality is, that's their situation. It doesn't have to be yours. Or if you know, I know this is at least how the Caribbean WhatsApps are. They send you these videos of these like made up like stories and they start talking about like something about parenthood or they start talking about like deadbeats or they start talking about children. And then now you in your bag all of a sudden and now you just created something out of nothing. Right? Like, listen, those things are like good entertainment, but that's not your life. Um, so take control of what you can, right? Set those boundaries and like build that respect. And please, just so don't go listening to your little kooky auntie, right? That be sending you messages. That's where they can read your life, right? Control your peace. All right, y'all. It's gonna be super important. Because leads me to my next piece is understanding that co-parenting is just not a momentary thing. It's a lifetime. It's a long-term commitment. Right? Like parenting is one of those things that is just nonstop. You always have to adjust. You always have to grow as a person because your child has to grow as a person, right? And y'all grow up. Everything is a unit. Right? You can't just stay idle and stay the same because that's why we sometimes deal with the things that we do now because our parents didn't want to do that. They understood that like parenting was a long-term commitment. They said, I don't give a fuck. I'm not going to change. Right. And that's why some of us are a little fucked up now. And we have to like break it. We have to break the cycle now within ourselves. But we ended up having to do a lot of work, right? That's the last thing we want for our own children. So that's something that like I want us to really think about. It's not a day, it's not a month, it's not a year. It's a long term commitment. Um, and you just have to be okay with with getting dirty, right? And doing the things that you have to do, both literally and figuratively. Okay. And that's because in order to have that mindset and the importance of that mindset is you have to become that positive role model for your child. It's really important that they have like that base at home, right? Even if it's two homes, because I think people ask me all the time, who do you look up to and who do you idolize? I say Roberto Clemente. The man, sorry, Roberto Clemente Walker, because his whole name is important. That man was a humanitarian. I just watched his interviews, the way he spoke about his wife, the way he spoke about like the work he felt like he had to do. I was like, damn, that's who I would like to idolize. And it's great to know that, but it took me till I was 20 something to be able to have that mentality to be like, yo, you know what? Not only was he one of my favorite baseball players that I never got to see, but I see what he's done as a male figure, right? And it's nice to have. It's nice to think about, but it would have been dope to have that be within my own father, right? I like my mom's dope. That's my guy. She holds it down in ways that I can't even imagine. She made me the man I am today. But there's certain things that we just couldn't relate on, and I wish I had that. Right? I'm like something that many of us wish we had, and it's okay to leave that. Right? Um. So when you have positive role models, it's one of those things where you just know where your base is, you know where you're getting it from, and you never have to deal with the who am I or just question their identity in general, right? So that's important that we give them that support to just be the best version of themselves, right? So as we continue to think about co-parenting, right? And like just in essence, how rewarding and how challenging it could be and just being open to have all those open conversations is gonna be super important. It's gonna like require dedication, it's gonna require compromise, it's gonna require sacrifice, focus, but all of it is for the well-being of the child, right? So as you continue this, just think about the benefits, right? Think about how the good outweigh the bad. Um, so as we close out episode 2, I thank you. Keep rocking with the kid. We moving on to episode 3. Thank you for following the journey. We got this together. We a unit. Peace.